Hello and welcome to Aylesbury's WhizzFizz Festival. I'm Anne Ellison and it's a huge pleasure today to be talking to Eoin Colfer. Eoin is of course the author of the much loved and highly acclaimed Artemis Fowl series, and it's great to have you here today, Eoin.
Thanks, Anne.
And you're going to be talking today mainly about your latest brilliant series, The Fowl Twins, and the latest of which is The Fowl Twins Deny All Charges. And we thought it would be nice to kick off with reading a little bit from the book, if that's all right, Eoin.
Yeah, I'd love to. Unfortunately, in my mind, my voice sounds a little bit like Pierce Brosnan, so I always think this is going to be amazing. And then when I hear it back, I realize it's more like a Celtic Roland rat, which is very disappointing. But now you're going to have to listen when I read a few pages from The Fowl Twins Deny All Charges. And can I just say up front, I kind of front loaded this book with a lot of fart jokes, so you know what's coming and there's no excuse. If you keep going past chapter 2, you know what you're in for. And the most Wynn-centric chapter is where Beckett, who is one of our twins, is saying goodbye to his dear friend Whistleblower, who is a toy troll. So he's much like toy dogs are a smaller breed. Toy trolls are only 8 inches tall. And the trolls, he doesn't know this, but trolls have a very precise parting ritual. When you are saying goodbye to your friend who's a troll, you have to perform this ritual. So Beckett goes to Whistleblower's feeding rock and he's about to tell him that they have to part forever, possibly. And this is what happens. I do have bad news, said Beckett. The worst, actually. Whistleblower froze, a hank of meat halfway to his mouth. Don't tell me. Miles wants to hang out with us again. I still have tusk ache from trying to teach him my language the last time. That guy is a dope. That's not the news, said Beckett. And then he felt obliged to add, and Miles is not a dope. He is so a dope, insisted Whistleblower, combing his stiff mohawk with greasy fingers. He can't climb, he can't dig, and he can't fight. And that all spells dope in the troll world. There are multiple forms of intelligent whistle, and Miles is the best in most of them. So what's the bad news then, asked the troll. Beckett tried to organize his sentence mentally for a moment. Usually he left the transmission of information to Miles, but he was on his own this time. The bad news is this, he said, still not sure which words were going to come out. The fairies know that you and I are meeting up. They're watching us right now from up high beyond the sky with a magic spyglass. Whistleblower raised both of his shaggy eyebrows. Magic spyglass? I know what satellite surveillance is, buddy. I thought Miles had bamboozled that. He did, but then we exploded a jet and Father had a talk with the fairies and now we are up the creek. Dad says you have a couple of days before the LEP come for you, and he wasn't even supposed to tell me that much. They're coming all this way for me? Asked Whistleblower. Not just you, but you're on the list. I can't fight them all, so you have to go. Whistleblower hopped to his feet, balancing easily on the rock. You're breaking up the team? I can't help it. I promised. But we're brothers. I wish we were brothers, but we're not, and I promised my real brother. They sat in miserable silence for a few moments, both slightly afraid of how Whistleblower might react. After all, it was conceivable that he might lose control of himself in the manner of trolls and throw a massive, destructive tantrum. But Whistleblower had an idea. He offered a kernel of a plan to Beckett. Miles might be a dope, but he likes problems, stupid problems like this. Beckett cheered up immediately. That's right. Miles will find a way around this. He loves figuring things out. Well, very well. If we must part, we must complete the parting ritual as a sign of mutual respect. No, said Beckett. No parting rituals. You must leave now. The troll jumped on his feeding rock, turned his back to Beckett and stood on one leg. This is the ritual, he said. Beckett thought he should make at least an attempt to interpret the more than likely noble symbolism of this stance. I see. Showing me your back means that you are leaving, but raising one foot means that you're always ready to return. Is that right? I bet it is. No, said the troll, completely wrong. When friends part, we allow our winds to mingle. The blend of particles unites us forever. It is very powerful troll magic. Beckett had thought his friend couldn't possibly get any more awesome, but the parting ritual smashed the troll's previous record. Are you saying that we fart at each other to seal the bond of our friendship? That is what I am saying, said Whistleblower, the mingling of the winds. You are the best and coolest friend I will ever have, said Beckett. I know, said Whistleblower, and I appreciate your moderate fighting skills, so I vow never to eat you. Now turn your back. I will say the sacred words, and then we shall expel wind in each other's direction. And remember, do not turn around until the winds disperse. Beckett did as he was told. The toy troll sent a howl echoing over the flat calm ocean, then recited the sacred verse. Warrior, both loyal and true, the gift of wind I give to you. The particles inside my tongue, I blow your way from out my bum. Now that's a poem, thought Beckett. And that is the end of that particular literary passage. And it doesn't get any better. So if you're expecting it to have reached a low, no, it only gets worse. So you have been warned.
There's some more great scenes coming up with between Beckett and Whistleblower, which are not for the faint-hearted later in the book. But back to the twins. Can I just ask, Eoin, what inspired you to first write about Artemis's younger brother twins?
Well, they were kind of the characters that were least mined, if you like. There was so many characters in the Artemis series, but I'd really gone into them quite a lot, and I was a bit tired of them. So I knew I wanted to go back to the world, but not really with the characters who had been explored so much. So Beckett and Miles had just been mentioned in passing. They had been plot points or plot devices. So I thought, yeah, that's interesting. And also I have two boys myself. And even though they're not twins, they do have that. It's very interesting to me how children who are born in the same house and have the same upbringing can be so completely different. I mean, they're literally born, and anyone who has kids would probably agree. They're born with certainly half of their little personalities ready to go. So it's inherently dramatic when you have siblings who are different in a story. You just have to start them talking and they will find opposite points of view. So it became quite easy to come up with dramatic situations. You could just pick a location and drop these kids into it and then let them be true to their characters. And the next thing you know, you had a lot of comedy and a lot of action. So they were the perfect. And also in a story like this, you need the human to be the everyman, so to kind of navigate your way through the fairy world. So in this case, that's Beckett. Miles is really the Artemis figure, the icy aloof genius, but Beckett is pretty much the one that people tend to relate to and follow through the series. So yeah, it became the obvious choice after a while.
I really like that, exactly that, the fact that they're two very different characters. And I was going to ask whether, as you say, Miles is a sort of intellectual genius and Beckett talks to the animals, and people sometimes make the mistake of thinking that he's not very intelligent, but he is, and he's got a kind of intuitive intelligence. Were you kind of deliberately making a point that intelligence isn't always measured in the obvious ways?
Yeah, I'm really interested in multiple intelligences, and this is the theory that there's so many more ways to be intelligent than one, and if people can latch onto their brand of intelligence, they can go a long way riding that wave. And unfortunately, in schools, the only intelligence that is deemed to be of any value is academic, and even sometimes it's even narrower than that, and it's kind of rote learning. Is deemed to be the thing. And if you can't learn your tables, or if you can't learn a Shakespeare sonnet, you're deemed to be unintelligent or to not really be that smart. And I don't think that's fair, and I don't think it's right. And I think it kind of messes up the development of kids who could be really intelligent, but they're just told all their life, no, you're no good at school. You are no good at school. And Beckett has that instinct that a lot of sporty kids have, a lot of kids that aren't necessarily good at maths or academic subjects have, where they can just negotiate their ways through life, and they do much better in the outside world when school is over. And can I say, it's not fair on the academic kids either, because they're led to believe, whoa, all I need to do is learn this off and I'm going to be success. And then when they're unleashed on the world, or rather the world is unleashed upon them, they realize there's so much to it. Interpersonal skills, for example, are so vitally important. And a lot of kids who study hard and excel at exams might not have developed those. And that's not to say that they don't have the ability to develop them, but they've just never, they've always been told, this is what you need to do. You need to go to Eton, you need to go to Trinity College, and you need to keep on. And also that transition from secondary school to university is really tough for them, because university expects you to think critically, without being told what your opinion is. Because secondary school critical is not critical thinking. It's really, here's what you're supposed to think, learn that off and regurgitate it in your A levels. It's, I think, multiple intelligences for me is, and increasingly, I'm delighted to see universities in England are really interviewing the person, and the grades are almost secondary. And I think that's a fantastic development, and hopefully it will continue.
I completely agree. And I think it's great seeing the twins, and you kind of get that complete picture of all the different types of intelligence. And you talked about when you were a school teacher there, and how much of your experiences there fed into your characters. I think I read somewhere that you always like the cheeky ones, the cheeky pupils.
I do. I mean, I tend to have a lot of time for cheeky kids, especially if they're funny. You know, if they're genuinely funny, and they're not just shouting insults. And I made a big mistake with my own kids very early on. I told them, I don't know what I was thinking, but I told them, if you're in trouble and you can make me laugh when I'm angry, which is the hardest time to do it, then you're out of trouble. And that could have been a massive mistake, because sometimes it's very inappropriate. You know, if one kid has the other kid in a headlock and they're trying to do knock knock jokes to get out of trouble, and I'm not in the mood, but I can't back down on that. And it has led to some really hilarious interchanges between me and my two boys. And even to this day, they still do that, and they still remember. I think it's the only rule of mine they've ever remembered. I had two rules: if you're in trouble, make me laugh. And the second rule was no chocolate for breakfast. And that rule is broken, I'd say, on a daily basis with Coco Pops.
There's a bit actually where you kind of do a similar thing with the twins and their father. And I think Miles, when the father's angry with them, and Miles tries to diffuse it by using silly comments, but but his father's not having any of it, is he?
No, he gets to, yeah, that's one of their tricks, is they try and be obtuse and deliberately misunderstand what's going on. And they think they're being very clever, but actually their dad has tumbled to this some years ago. So he cuts them off. It's actually quite emotional. I mean, even though there is a lot of scatological stuff in it, it also tries to mine those emotional relationship depths where parents fall out with their kids, and how that really hurts the kids when their parents are angry at them. And I just thought it was hilarious that for 20 years now, the Fowl family kids have been surviving all sorts of adventures and really inflicting emotional damage on their parents. And the parents finally have had enough in this book, and they're just sick of their kids going off on these life-threatening adventures, and they try and ground them. So I just think that's hilarious that the boys get grounded. For most of us would get grounded for eating a cookie or getting our boots muddy. These guys get grounded for crashing a jet into the Atlantic Ocean. So it's just, even though they're kids, they still have the normal punishments. And that was kind of amusing to me.
Yeah, I love that. And the books, I mean, as people will tell from listening to the extract you read, there's a terrific love of language. They're incredibly funny and descriptive. And there is, of course, your love of acronyms, acronym being an acronym in itself. And there's other brilliant ones like NANI, which Nano Artificial Neural Network Intelligence System. And so have you always loved acronyms? You must have had great fun making them up for this.
I did. I love acronyms. I love word games. Usually the character names might mean something or they're quite unusual, but I think acronym was my biggest challenge, to make acronym an acronym. And
Yes.
eventually I had to go put it in Spanish. So that meant the character had to be Spanish. So it kind of rewrote the whole character. The nun initially was Irish because I thought, an Irish nun would be funny. But because I couldn't make it in English, it's probably, I think since then I've thought of about 4 ways to do it. But at the time, I couldn't get acronym into an acronym without putting it in Spanish and using the Y as and, which is, I mean, I think I put more effort into this than it's worth, but it keeps me going out of my office. When you're out here for 9 months working on a book, you have to be entertained or entertain yourself. So
I love the names as well. And we, of course, have had in the first book, Lord Teddy Bleedem-Dry, who makes a little reappearance here as well. And Axeborn was another one I loved. And I think you must have a great time inventing the names.
Bleedem-Dry is one I've had for a long time because it sounds like it could be a name. It's very close, even though it obviously comes from the phrase to bleed someone dry. But and actually that's what he's doing too. So it has a nice little double relevance, and he's actually one of my favorite characters, Lord Teddy Bleedem-Dry. Again, you can see the influence of Captain Hook there. Captain Hook I think is one of the best realized villains in children's books, along with Long John Silver. I think is fantastic because they have that like duality about them, where in their mind they're not bad guys. Captain Hook is just insisting on good form. And Long John Silver's kind of in that gray area where he's with the bad guys, but he seems to have a heart of gold underneath there. You cannot really be against them because they're so charming that it's hard to hate them.
Yeah.
So Teddy is that as well. I think he's a very charming guy, but also he's very nasty. So he doesn't have the heart of gold, but he's so ridiculous and so funny that the audience just want to see him more and more. And it's like, if you look at cartoons or movies, if you look at Hannibal Lecter, he's a horrible human being, but he is very hypnotic and you just want to see him back on the screen. And I would hope that Teddy is like that. He's a nasty piece of work, but he's very funny and he's so selfish. In some ways, he's very childish. But so I'm going to Teddy's going to make a return, I think, at some point back to his full glory.
Good. I really love in the books there's this sort of mix of magic and folklore and technology, and I think I'd imagine that a lot of the Irish folklore and your love of that is very steeped in your Irishness and Irish traditions. Did you grow up with hearing a lot of Irish folk tales?
Yeah, we are very lucky here in Ireland. In schools, in that folktales are taught as part of the languages course. So I just presume that was the same everywhere, where you were taught the mythology of your country, but it really isn't. And most children and young people access folktales on their own, or through their library books, but it's not built into the curriculum. So in Ireland, every child would know the top 10 stories about mythology and the heroes of Irish mythology. So I grew up with that, and I loved it. And I became a big fan of an artist called Jim Fitzpatrick, who made graphic novels of the major folk tales. But what I really liked about his work was the fairies were not represented in the twee manner we're used to, where they're these little creatures who kind of flit around your garden. They were seen as real survivors. So these were people who had survived against the humans for thousands of years. And I liked that way of presenting them. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to do something, I want to be closer to that side of it, where these are a formidable force to be reckoned with. But I still need something else, another element that is not associated with fairies. And I thought technology was the way to go, because as a teacher, I could see that back then, I suppose mobile phones were just starting to come in big time. And I could see kids were obsessed with these phones, literally obsessed. And And I thought, well, if I give the fairies this technology, it might kids might be able to latch onto that and identify it, and that will help them to get into the world. And that's what happened. And a lot of the stuff I had in the early Artemis Fowl books is just so passe now. I mean, it's just developed so quickly. I remember in the third book, I had developed this thing called a C Cube, which was basically a hand computer with a scanner in it. And at the time, that was futuristic. But now that's old hat. It's like the oldest iPod or something. So it's amazing how fast technology is moving. And I think it's okay because those books are taken as books of the early in the millennium, so they're of their time. But really, it's funny to read a book now where the big reveal is a little cube that can work as your phone and play all your music. It's like we all have those. So what's the big deal?
And
But
have your own sons been good at keeping you up to date with technology?
absolutely, that's a really good point in that they're like everyone else their age. They like to keep up to date. And I mean, people don't realize that when I was younger, when I was teaching, so maybe 25 years ago, there was a camp. There were two camps, and there were people who did know how to use a computer, and there are people who didn't know. And that doesn't really exist anymore. Everybody knows how to use a computer. It's not rocket science. But back then, like the people who could use computers were like magicians, kind of, that they could work these crazy machines. But that time is just gone now. I don't think you'd be very pressed to find someone under 60 who didn't know how to use a computer, even under 70, because my mom is 82 and she knows how to use the basics of an iPad. So um, that world is gone. But I suppose in the first Artemis Fowl book, that was still how the world operated.
Yeah, yeah. You yourself come from a family, is it, of five boys? You were brought up with four brothers.
Yeah.
Were you a very creative family?
We were, I think. My parents were very creative. My dad he was a bit of a Renaissance man. He was a painter. He was a writer. He was a historian. He was one of the first guys to do sabacco diving in Ireland. So he just had all these strings to his bow. And then my mother was also a writer. She was a DJ on local radio where she'd do historic and dramatic programs. She had a women's group who wrote poetry. She was an actress, an award-winning amateur actress. So this was the environment we grew up in, and we were all encouraged. Our artistic side was encouraged, which is not. I mean, I'd say it's normal now, but it wasn't normal in 1970s, 80s Ireland. So we were very lucky,
Mm,
and I think art was really valued. And if you said you were going to write a story, it wasn't seen as a waste of time. And so we grew up writing stories, drawing pictures, thinking that everybody did that. And it was only when we got to school then we found out that most kids were playing sports, um, and cycling bicycles and doing whatever. Whereas I especially, I think I would go off on my own and read a book and write a story and draw a picture and listen to music. So, and which is what I still do really. But I knew that was something that was valued in my house, and
yeah.
hopefully that has become the norm a little bit, certainly more than it used to be.
So you knew from an early age that you wanted to be a writer.
I don't think I had I don't think I had it down so pat. I knew that I wanted to write stories and I was going to continue to write stories, but I didn't know if there was something you could do with that other than have the stories. And I think when I was about 15 or 16, I realized that it was possible for somebody from a small town to write a book. Uh, but even then, I didn't think I'd be able to do that for a living. I thought, well, I'll be a teacher and maybe I can write my books then in the evenings. And that's kind of what happened. And for a long time, I wrote 6 books, I think, uh, that were published in Ireland. And then it wasn't until the 7th book, which was Artemis Fowl, that I was able to take a break from the teaching and concentrate on writing. And that was 20, 21 years ago. So but I always thought, listen, I'll take a couple of years off until the money runs out, and then I can go back teaching. But fortunately, that hasn't happened yet.
One of the other things that I think you do brilliantly in your book is that they appeal to children or young adults and adults who might be reading them to the children or for their own pleasure. How hard is it to straddle those two things? Because I think you do it brilliantly. And I love that you don't ever talk down to the children. You know, you're not afraid of using quite difficult words sometimes, and I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
But it's a really nice balance, I think.
That was something I had to fight for. Not fight for, that makes it sound like I waged war, but there was definitely discussions with editors, and not in England, I have to say, not in the UK, but in the States, that the vocabulary was quite difficult and that sometimes the plot twists uh, might be too difficult for the younger kids. And I just didn't agree with that at all, especially as a teacher. I always say that most 10 and 11-year-olds are just as smart as we are, but they don't have the life experience. And if you can just keep that in mind, you'll be fine. And they would say to me, but they won't understand this word. And I would say, good, well, they can go and look it up. And that was the teacher in me.
Mhm.
And I always thought that maybe they can work it out from the context. I mean, that was the big lesson in teaching, to compose a sentence where you can work out what the word means from the context. So I didn't see a problem with that, but certainly some editors did. And there was an attempt at one point to change an ending of a book because it was a sting kind of thing. And I really fought against that. And I'm glad that I did now. Whereas now, I don't get that anymore.
Mm.
But I don't want to go into YA. I mean, I don't see my books as being YA. They're very much
Yeah.
pre-puberty books.
Yeah.
But I still don't want to simplify them down. So
Yeah, that you can see the age they're aimed at. But
yeah,
as a parent who might be reading them aloud, you get
yeah.
enormous pleasure out of them as well. And I think that's fantastic. I also think that, so much now is dumbed down, whatever age you're at, that I think it's great
Mm.
that you have sort of managed to fight for that, because I agree. I think kids like the challenge as well.
Yeah, they do. And I always it's common again now. And maybe it was common then. I can't really speak for all writers, but you look around, there's people like Jenny Valentine doing amazing, stuff that is age appropriate yet very complex.
Mm.
Jonathan Stroud is doing brilliant adventure stories that are appropriate but quite complex. And Michael Morpurgo, there's just Mallory Blackman is another one.
Mm.
There's loads of people doing it, and
Mm.
it's not that you just write it. It actually takes effort to dumb things down because
Mm.
you have to shift your own mental gears, and
Mm.
I just don't do that. And I think it's easier not to do it.
Yeah.
Um, and then of course there's a sea of books that are very dumbed down, and
Mm.
I don't. I know from my own experience with kids, they read 2 pages in and they just go, "Oh my god, this is for 2-year-olds," and they don't keep going. So
Mm. Mm.
ultimately, and like you look at J.K. Rowling, she never dumbed anything down. In
Exactly.
fact, she went more complex
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
she went on, and the markets bore out the theory that kids are well able for it. So why dumb it down? That's what I would say.
What were your own favourite books when you were growing up, when you were the kind of age that your readers are?
I always liked a good adventure. So I love books like Stig of the Dump by Clive King. That was one of my favorites. And why I liked that, I think, and Huckleberry Finn would have been another. And they share a few things there in that the hero was both 12-year-old boys, but they're not typical heroes. Barney in Stig of the Dump was a lonely guy, didn't have any friends actually, wasn't very adventurous, was a little bit clumsy, uh, but he could be the hero of a book. And Huck Finn, he certainly wasn't the classic hero in that he didn't like going to school. He didn't even like wearing shoes. Occasionally he would smoke a pipe. And he swore. He was in trouble for swearing all the time. And the most revolutionary part, his best friend was a slave. And at the time, that was actually shocking for people. Of course, it's applauded now, or not even noticed. But what I liked about both of those characters were that I felt if I was there, um, I could be on that raft and they would accept me because I was a little skinny kid with no physical talent, not good at sports. And I thought, well, I could go and maybe I could read a story on the raft every night and everyone would like that. And it just gave me a doorway into that world. And for me, that was very important. As a child, and in your bed at night in the dark and with your little torch, uh, that doorway, it's so easy to break through if you have a doorway. And Huck Finn or Barney from Stick of the Dump, they were my little doorways.
Yeah, great. Just one more thing, and then we've got a few questions from people who sent in their questions from some of your readers. But just one quick thing I wanted to ask also, that I love your description of your character's clothes. And I think I read that, maybe it was Artemis was inspired by a picture of your brother in his communion suit. And in the twins, we have the Gloop tie made of Beckett's old fish and things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The Gloop tie is one of these passing ideas that I think isn't really going to go anywhere. That's just going to be a little one-liner that just took off, and everybody loved the Gloop ties, and people started to wear Gloop ties and send me photos of Gloop ties. But to recap, what is a Gloop tie? You must remember there are two characters: Miles, who's super formal, wears a suit all the time, and then Beckett, who hardly wears anything unless he's forced to. So he will wear a pair of shorts if they're going out. So to kind of undermine all Miles' formality, he makes a golden tie from the deceased corpse, obviously deceased, of his jellyfish Gloop, which he laminates in the laminating machine, which must have been very smelly, and then wears as a tie. And people just think that's hilarious. So, and I believe in some schools they had, art class they would get some card and they would design a golden tie and make it. And it was just so popular that it went on to become a major motif. And on the cover of I think, and you probably can't see them there, but on the cover of most of the books, you can see the guys in their golden ties. So I love that kind of little detail that the readers pick up on that I had almost forgotten, and they make popular. Another time that happened was Mulch Diggums, the dwarf. He was just a small character in the first book, but he became so popular that he's now one of the major characters in Artemis Fowl because the readers loved him so much. And I really like that, and I'm happy to react to that. Sometimes authors don't want to hear any opinions because it might change the book, but I'm very happy to hear opinions like that. We love this guy, can we have more of him? And sometimes I'd say, yeah, let's do that, and other times I don't. But Gloop definitely is one of those little nuggets that really made me happy that people picked up on and that I could expand on over the books.
Great. There's just one thing I'd like to pick up on too, which I've just found here, I'd made a note of, and I should have said it at the time, but when we were talking about them having driven their parents mad all through the years, I love the bit towards the end of the book when the parents are doing trance yoga to try and help them get through one of the terrible incidents that their sons have involved them in.
It's true, because the thing about kids is you can have a massive fight with your kids about something, obviously not a physical fight, but a big argument. And me and my wife, Jackie, are traumatized for days about this. We're in the kitchen just holding our heads. And 5 seconds later, our kids have just completely forgotten about it. It's meant absolutely nothing to them, and they're moving on with their lives. And that's so healthy mentally to be able to do that. And I just imagine, well, this is just an argument about muddy boots. Imagine if your son had just, almost destroyed the world. I mean, how traumatic would that be for the parents? So I tried to put a bit of that into the Fowl Twins, and it links back to why the books are enjoyable to the parents, because they're going, yes, I would so be messed up if my kids did something like that. And no one ever says, how did Wendy Darling's parents feel about them flying off to Neverland? I'm sure they weren't too thrilled about it. It's all about, oh, we can fly now. So I do think that helps when the parents are reading the story to their kids in bed that night, because they can go, yes, yeah, I would be upset. And they can really, as I said, you're looking for that door into the story. And for parents, that is it, to say, uh, yes, parents never get a fair shout. And usually parents are killed off. I mean, Roald Dahl, he was very creative at killing parents off. I believe in the witches, he might have run them over with a dinosaur, or no, with a, was it a rhinoceros? I think. So they were trampled by a rhinoceros. So yeah, I like to give the parents a little bit of outrage.
I'm just going to read some of the questions that we've had in. So
Right.
Matthew, who's 10, asks, how did you get the inspiration to change Artemis from mean to nice?
Well, Matthew, when I wrote Artemis first, it was just going to be one book. So he was just going to stay mean the whole time. But then when I decided to write several books, I thought, well, I can't just have him being the bad guy. That's really bad. That's a bad message for anybody, really, that be bad and good things will happen to you. So I slowly switched him over until he became nice. So it took 8 books to do it, because it's really hard for people to change. But then once he became nice in the very last chapter of the very last book, then that was the end. Now, obviously, we know he probably went on to have a happy life, but it was the end of his stories. So once he was nice, he was kind of the same as all the other heroes. So I just I let him retire, and brought in his brothers to take his place.
That's great. And Millie, who's 6, we've talked a bit about names, but Millie wants to know how you invent the names of your characters.
Well, sometimes it's really easy. Like if you take, for example, Holly Short, she had red cheeks. That was the holly berries, and then she's quite little, so that's short. So Holly Short. Uh, but Artemis Fowl, that's quite complicated, because Artemis is the Greek or Roman goddess of the hunt. So it was given to a boy if he proved himself to be an excellent hunter. So it was an honorary name. And fowl, the verb to fowl, or a fowl is a winged creature. So if you put Artemis and Fowl together, it is the hunter of winged creatures, which is what Artemis was doing in the first book. So that's quite a complex name. And, nobody gets that except me, but it makes me happy. Um, and, and, and I do that a lot with all my names. So if you look through the books, you'll find all sorts of examples of names that mean something. And then a lot of names don't mean anything. So, but some do. And sometimes the name just has to sound right. Like I think some of the best names just roll off the tongue. Names like Sherlock Holmes. That's a great name. It just sounds right in your mouth. It sounds right coming out. And it's something about the syllable mix. I'm not sure. So very often I just experiment with loads of different names until one that sounds right hits me. So there's all sorts of ways of doing it, but I do spend quite a bit of time, and I do change things quite a lot.
And Cara, who's 9, asks, what is your favourite place in the world or the fairy world?
That is a very good question from Cara, because sometimes when you're a child, especially, you feel that your favorite place is quite magical. And for me, my favorite place is a small headland in the southeast corner of Ireland called Hook Head, like Captain Hook, a hook. And there's an old saying you might have heard called by hook or by crook. And that's where that saying comes from. It was by Hook Head and Crook Head. And that's how the Normans had to get into Ireland, either by hook or by crook. So the Hook is where my dad is from and where we spent all our holidays. And we spent our holidays in a small caravan in between the oldest lighthouse, working lighthouse in the world, it still is, and a Norman castle called Slade Castle. And in between those, on the stretch, there was this beautiful coastline of cliffs and flat rocks where we basically explored every summer. And when you're younger, a little tidal pool can be the most fascinating place in the world. It's full of sea anemone, maybe little tiny fish we used to call cobblers, seaweed that hides little shellfish and crabs scuttling in the crevices. And in one particular pool, there was a massive engine, which was probably from an old fishing boat, but we would fantasize that it was from a spaceship or a German submarine or many exciting things. And we had years of playing in that pond, which was no bigger than 5 meters square and no deeper than 1 foot at any point. But for us, it was a complete magical wonderland, and I would still count that place as my favorite in this world or any other.
Lovely. Davina is 7 and wants to know, if you weren't an author, what would you have been instead?
Wow. Well, I would love to. Really enjoyed teaching. I love teaching, so I probably would be a teacher. But if I could have any job, even I'd love to be a painter. I don't think I tried to be an artist, but I'd never made it very far. But I would love to just to spend my days painting pictures, because I think that is one of the greatest magics, to be able to conjure a picture out of the air. And that is why I love collaborating with artists. So I've done a lot of work with artists on my graphic novels, for example. You can see it there, Illegal. That's our last graphic novel with Andrew Donkin and the Italian artist Giovanni Rigano. So I just love watching artists work. And of course, Oliver Jeffers. I did a book with Oliver, and PJ Lynch. We've done 2 books. We're probably going to do a third. So it's a great thrill for me to work alongside an artist and to see what they can do. You just hand them words on a page and they make it into this amazing drawing. So I really enjoy that process. And if I could do it myself, I would, but I can't. So I have to buddy up with some great artists, which I love doing.
Rosie is 7 and she says, do you ever make things happen in your stories that you don't want to, like sad or scary things, because it makes the story better?
Yes, I do. Sometimes you have to do, if you're doing adventure stories and nobody gets hurt or nobody dies, then after a while, the reader starts losing faith in you, because they think, they're never good. There's no danger here. Everyone is always fine. So every now and then, someone has to get a little bit hurt. And once in the Artemis Fowl series, somebody died, and a lot of people got really upset. And I got letters saying, "You've ruined my childhood," and like quite serious. And I never realized till then how seriously or how much people are invested in stories. They really give it a piece of their heart. And then if you kill someone, then you break their hearts. And there are still people 15 years later who are still upset with me and stopped reading the series because I did that. So it did teach me a lesson. I still do it, but only if I feel the story really, really needs it. And it's not even every book. It might be once every 4 books or something. Someone dies. But I also write grown-up thrillers, and yeah, there's a lot more people getting bumped off in those ones. But in the young people's one, not so much.
And one more, I think, which is Ben, who's 11, and he wants to know, do you start with the end of your story and work backwards, or create characters to develop the story naturally?
That's a really good question, Ben. And the answer is it's a mixture. Sometimes I have an idea for a name of a character and I can build, I put that in the center like a spider in a web, and then I can build around that. And other times I have the end of a story, especially if it's a crime story, and I can write that. I write that first, and then I can work back from there. And then other times I'll have an idea for the middle of a story. So you really never know. And I don't write in order anyway. What usually happens is I write about 2 pages of notes, then I write the opening to see if I can get a tone that I like. And then from there, I just jump all over the place. And at the last thing I do is I put it all together like a jigsaw and smooth over the joins so that it reads quite smoothly. But yeah, very often I start at the end. The book I'm working on at the moment, I know what's happening in the end, and I've only written about 10,000 words, but I do have the end, and it really helps me because you've got something to work towards.
And is that's not the next one in the foul, because there's another Fowl Twins coming up later this year, isn't there?
There's another Fowl Twins coming up in October 19th, which is, I know that because it is my 30th wedding anniversary. So that's called The Fowl Twins Get What They Deserve, which might be good or it might be bad, but I think it's a really nice one. And I've tried to bring back a few of the characters from the Artemis Fowl books that I never really told you what happened to them. So just to finish off their stories. So that's coming out in October, and then I will probably retire the Fowl family for a while, because I've been working on Fowl books now for 23, not nearly 25 years. So it's time to maybe have a look at a few other things.
Oh, well, thank you very, very much, Eoin. It's been fantastic to talk to you. And thank you for joining us at WhizzFizz. And thank you for everybody who's tuned in. And I would thoroughly recommend the Fowl Twins if you haven't already read them. And we'll look forward to the next instalment in the autumn. So thank you very much, Eoin.
Thank you. And it's really nice to see you again. So hopefully next time in person.
Yeah, exactly. Let's hope soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.